I'm getting too old for this shit. Welcome to the Knicks Film School Postgame Show, presented by BetUS, where I'm here to talk about a completely normal basketball game that I have already run out of words to describe. Okay then, that happened. Hey, the Knicks won, and you know why that's great? Because it's better than the alternative. And if I had to sit with that shit burger for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days on my annual pilgrimage to sunny Florida, God help me, there would have been hell to pay. But I don't have to, because the minivan, well, one of those automatic doors got stuck. And the Knicks live to tell the tale by a final score, can't write it, of 149 to 148 over the Atlanta Hawks. What an absolute shit show of a game. I could try to talk about that one sensibly, but I don't know what good it would do. Let's start here. I'm gonna try to be coherent. It's not gonna work, but I'm gonna try. As I just walked a moat into my office here, pacing back and forth for the last roughly half hour. Sometimes you just got to find a way to win. And it's funny, I was writing a newsletter for next week earlier today, in which I talk about what's at stake for the rest of the season. What are the things that matter? What are the things that we're looking for? Because as I wrote, almost regardless of the outcome of this game, this was going to be the theme of Monday's newsletter. That like there's place in the standing is all but secured. It would take a complete collapse by them. Not that this team has ever collapsed before. It would take a complete collapse by them over the course of the rest of the season. And like the Indiana Pacers or the Milwaukee Bucks catching, complete fire, for them to be anything less than the 3 seed. So I was like, well, what matters? And like, had they lost this game, I probably would have gotten up here and talked about how at the end of the day, I don't think that there's much negative to take from this game in terms of the big picture. Obviously, this defense could not stop anything or anyone for really like starting late in the second quarter, going on through the entirety of the third quarter when they gave up, I think, 40 something points, and down the stretch of the game in the fourth quarter, they couldn't get any stops. And that would have been part, like if you were going to have a big picture takeaway, I think that would have been the closest thing to it. And even that, I would have gone up here and said, and I'm going to get up here and say, second night of a back-to-back, this group of guys has given all of themselves over the first 54 games of this season. Am I going to kill them for having absolutely nothing left? Like nothing left. In the final game before they're about to go and get a break. Finally. No, I wouldn't have killed them for that. People would have killed them for that. Putting aside the last 10 seconds of regulation, people would have killed them for that. I would have tried to take a kinder approach. All that being said, I talked last night about character and grit and being able to win games when you're not supposed to win them, when you don't have it in the way that you traditionally have it. And when they went down 5 at the beginning of the overtime period, I mean, aside from being apoplectic, I was already, I obviously had conceded defeat at that point, because they could not stop the Hawks at all until they did. And were there a couple of buckets after LeVert hit that three to send the team up by 5 in overtime? Yeah, there were a couple of buckets. But I thought at least this version of the team, and I'm sure I have a feeling the name Mitchell Robinson is going to come up at some point in the conversation tonight. For them to give up only, I can't believe I'm saying only, but for them, it's only 7 points in the final 4 minutes of the overtime period after what they had allowed up until that point, and digging deeper than I thought they had the ability to dig, and pulling out a win because you made just enough defensive stops and got some turnovers, and you found a way. You found a way to get it done and get, one fewer stop, and we would be having a very different post game. One more Atlanta make, we would be having a very different post game. They got just enough to eke this one out. And I think it's fitting in some ways, in many ways, actually, that this is how the last game before the All-Star break ended, because if this freaking night that we just experienced doesn't perfectly encapsulate the season that this team has had, I don't know what could. They have had, over the first 53 games, including tonight, moments of absolute brilliance, moments where you thought there's not a defense in the world that is going to be able to stop this team. And you got it in so many different ways tonight. You got it from Jalen Brunson coming out of the gate saying, "Oh, you think you're going to stop me? I got other ideas." You got it from Karl-Anthony Towns putting forth a scoring effort in the second and third quarters that you could watch NBA basketball for years and not see a player do what he did as effortlessly as he did it. A couple of the plays took a little bit more effort when he was just throwing up everything at the rim and it was going in. So that was beautiful. And they did it with passing. How many beautiful passes did this Knicks team have to cutters and other opportunities that the gravity of their best players opened up all over the court? So we've seen all that over the course of the season. We even saw some moments of defense throughout this game. But what else have we seen this year? We have seen moments where it doesn't look like they can stop anybody. And we saw some of those moments in this game. And more than anything, this team, I think, for a lot of people out there, and it's the tide has started to turn a little bit over the last several weeks. This team has left some folks feeling a little empty, a little wanting more, because there is something about them that it's just not adding up to what people felt like they got from last year's team. I've gone back to this theme over and over again because I think it is the most relevant overarching theme of this season, is the differences between this team and last year's team. Higher ceiling, lower floor. And if that last 10 seconds of the game didn't fully regulation didn't fully encapsulate what a lot of people have been feeling over the course of this season, that there's just something a little bit off with this team that they can't fully get behind, I don't know what could have done it better. And we have to talk about it. I mean, I would love to bury it and never talking about it again for the rest of my life. I'm going to go through it quick and then we can move on. It started with Precious Achiuwa, who we're going to talk about. He was absolutely one of the stars of the game. I think he has an argument for being you could actually argue that Precious was not better than Towns, because that was just too good of an offensive performance. And honestly, Brunson, what he did down the stretch was pretty incredible too. He was absolutely the third best Knick at worst. Shout out to Campaign, who is a part of that conversation as well. But on that play, Precious Achiuwa falls asleep. Should have never allowed George Niang to get that three off, followed by Karl-Anthony Towns. Again, the most that is the best offensive first half or pre-All-Star break part of the season that I have ever seen from a Knick. Watching this team for over 30 years, I've never seen a player have a better start to a season before an All-Star break than Karl-Anthony Towns just did. And yet, there are moments where you realize why, in part, It mostly had to do with money, but in part why Minnesota was like, yeah, we're okay getting out of this business. And that pass, an inexplicable pass in that moment, was one of them. And then followed, I'm not going to kill Towns for not being able to get the board. He played last night. The guy's played a million minutes. I would guess he played close to 50 minutes tonight. 47 minutes. I'm not going to get on him for not having the legs to grab that rebound. And then Josh Hart committing a foul there, which absolutely reminded me of the foul that he committed on Kobe White at the end of that Bulls game, which I was lucky enough to be in person to see that. So all these little things, and you had to have 3 or 4 different things go wrong in order for that game to get to overtime. And sure enough, it did. But, and this is where I'm gonna hang my hat on this tonight. You did not let that define you. And I think if we are really going analogy to the season as a whole, as we enter into the final third, the stretch run, the run that will tell us what kind of team we have here as we enter a playoffs with real aspirations. Are they going to be able to live up to those aspirations? Or are they going to fall short? I think if you're a believer, you are a believer because you think that that's something special that last year's team had and that we've been starting to see signs of over the course of the last 2-3 weeks. I think you saw it in that overtime. Because a team does not win a game like that without having something to them, without having some shit to them. And this team has some shit to them. They get punched, they get knocked down, they pick themselves back up. Like last year's team when no game was ever over, it's the same thing with this year's team. No game is ever over with them, or at least they don't ever think it is. So, yeah, you're damn right. I'm coming out of this one a hell of a lot more positive than negative, despite all the things that we can get on them for getting into that situation to begin with. I still can't fully wrap my mind around what we just saw, but I'm gonna go try to through some specifics, and then I'm sure we're gonna have a goodly amount of super chat, so I don't want to spend too long here at the top. Karl-Anthony Towns, I kind of already said my piece about Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm just going to read off his final stat line. 44 points on 25 shots, 7 of 10 from behind the arc from your 7-foot center, 9 of 11 from the line. I wonder how many centers in NBA history has had 40-point games where they took 10 threes and got to the line 10 times, at least 10 times, and had 10 rebounds. Also 7 turnovers. That's part of the conversation here too. Also 7 turnovers, even in the first half, the second quarter, as he was going, like there were some turnovers that made you scratch your head. So that's part of the resume too. Probably keeps him from getting an A- if we're looking ahead to Benji's grade book. But in an utterly unreal performance from Karl-Anthony Towns. They didn't go to Towns in the fourth quarter. I think that's because he was gassed. I think that's because he was absolutely gassed. I thought he started to get gassed in the second quarter, to be honest with you. And the fact that he came out and did what he did in the third, I thought showed an immense amount of will on his part and just an absolute determination to do whatever the team needed him to do to get a win. So big shout out to Karl-Anthony Towns. Jalen Brunson, I mean, what can you say? 36 points on 21 shots. He got to the line 10 times, made 7, missed there in the fourth quarter. Luckily, it did not come back to bite them in the ass at the end of the day. 8 assists, 3 turnovers. You take that any day of the week. Came up big, got them off to the right foot, on the right foot, came up big when they needed him the most. Dyson Daniels got him a few times, but I mean, if we're doing talk about a game where I had 5 different plays that I was convinced would be the autograph signature moment of the game. It was the Cat 3 that put him up 124 to 118. Then it was the Jalen Brunson 3 over Dyson Daniels that put him up by 4. Then it was the JB Midi over Dyson Daniels that put him up by 4 again. Then it was the Precious Achiuwa putback. We're going to get to Precious Achiuwa, but ultimately we got to give the autograph signature moment of the game to the game-stealing bucket. Effectively, that's what it ended up being to make the score 149 to 148 against like a fake score. Teams that I've said this before, teams that fancy themselves title contenders, you got to have one of those guys. You're just not going to win anything if you don't have one of those guys. The Knicks have one of those guys. Are there 5 of them in the league? Are there 6? Are there 7? Are there 4? I don't know how many there are, but he's one of them. And he proved it yet again tonight. I would not be surprised in the least if when we are sitting there at the end of the season, he takes home the Clutch Player of the Year award. I looked up the statistics earlier today. He is as good a clutch player as there is in the league. Nikola Jokic is up there. Darius Garland has some great clutch numbers. But when you put forth the volume, there is, and I checked this today, and I'm sure it's just as true now, there is no player who is scoring more clutch points on a per clutch minute basis in the NBA this season than Jalen Brunson. And the fact that he is shooting that much on volume in clutch situation and making as high a percentage of the shots that he is taking is a testament to him. But the great thing about Jalen Brunson is you can't commit extra attention to him, because if you do that, he's going to find the pass like he did to Precious Achiuwa on the penultimate basket in overtime that put him up 147-144. So spectacular ending to the game from Jalen Brunson. Even though, man, talk about a funny trend. That's the other thing I was looking up earlier today. His on-off numbers are not where you would expect them to be, or not where you would want them to be. And tonight in a game they won by 1, he was a -11. And part of that has to do with campaign. Let's save Precious for last. Let's talk a little bit about campaign. Tweeted it out today. That's your autograph signature moment of the game, by the way. Check autograph tomorrow. I'm going to have one final video up before the break. And if you don't have the autograph app, download it. Use code KFS. Get rewarded for your fandom. Part of the reason why Brunson's plus minus was not where you want it is campaigns was awesome. And campaign had a stretch at the beginning of the fourth quarter that really should have sealed the game for the Knicks, where they went on a 9-0 run. They went up 113 to 101. They looked like they were about to pull away. And obviously we know what transpired from there, but it was another special game from campaign. Landry Shamet contributed for a second night in a row, which is not a sentence that I thought I would be saying anytime soon. Certainly not a sentence I thought I'd be saying 48 hours ago, or I guess 48 hours ago. And so good job by him. Mikal Bridges, another quiet night. I got to think of everybody on the team, of everybody in the league. I don't know that there's anybody in the NBA that needs a break more than Mikal Bridges. And so the fact that the volume isn't quite there, he's not taking too many shots, missed that midi in overtime. Thank God it didn't come back to bite him in the ass. Still went 5 for 8. His defense, we could talk about his defense. Defense was not great tonight. Again, he's dead tired. I'm not going to kill him for it. Go sleep for a week, please, Mikal Bridges. Don't wake up. I don't know how many hours are in a week. 168 hours. Sleep for like 157 of them, please. Take what do you take to go to sleep? An Ambien? Yeah, take one of those, please. Josh Hart had some Josh Hart moments. 18, 10, and 6. Certainly a Josh Hart stat line. Most key stat for Josh Hart, and he had a couple in overtime. 8 for 8 from the free throw line. Massive for him. Deuce, we hope he's okay. Gave it what he could. Didn't have it. Huck Porty. This is one of those games that make you feel like he's not ready for prime time. And we're going to end with Precious Achiuwa before we get to the Super Chats, because I think it's fair to say this was the game of Precious Achiuwa's career. Is it? I think I don't know if this was actually his career high. He may have tied his career high. He was right there at the end. I know they mentioned it. Finished with 26 points, 12 of 16 from the field, had 8 rebounds. Probably like to see a little bit more than 8 rebounds in 42 minutes, but, fine. Look, we've talked before about who's the most important player on this Knicks team. And that conversation usually comes back to Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns in some order. But there were moments this year, more than a few moments, where I thought that the answer to that question was OG Anunoby, because of the combination of he's your strongest defensive player. He gives you some nice size. You can't just close him out and expect that he's not going to be able to attack a closeout appropriately. And of course, he could hit the corner 3 at a prolific rate, or he's been doing it for pretty much his whole career. And the corner 3 has started to come around before this injury. He's at least in the conversation for the Knicks' most indispensable player. So when he went out and Precious Achiuwa had to step in, and there has been a lot of talk, and we're not gonna. Don't worry, my Tibbs my Tibbs soapbox is in the cleaner tonight. There's been a lot of talk about who should start and should Miles McBride start. Now, obviously tonight Miles McBride didn't have it, so it's kind of a moot point here. But to say that Precious, and specifically not Precious himself, but Precious's ability to contribute to winning basketball has been a bit maligned of late because of the feeling that he hasn't given quite enough on defense and he is stymieing them on offense. For him to go into the break and really put all of that behind him and come out with this sort of effort in, again, 42 minutes, excuse me, that they desperately needed. And even as he was having arguably the game of his life, you saw from Tibbs the compromises that Tibbs is making, because in the fourth quarter there, and I thought it was the correct decision, to be very clear, he stuck with campaign even after Jalen Brunson came back in, because he wanted the shooting. He wanted a little bit more pestersome presence on the defensive end. And then eventually it got to a couple minutes left and it just wasn't working as well as it needed to. So he went back to Precious and look, didn't close out on Niang as well as he needed to. That one play certainly, especially since they got the win, should not define his game tonight and will not define his game tonight, thank God. So awesome game from Precious Achiuwa. Look, I'm like completely spent mentally, emotionally, probably physically after the first 2/3 of this season. I feel it. I need this all-star break, and I'm sitting here talking in front of a freaking microphone on my fat ass while I enjoy some very nice liquor. Thank you, Ray Marcano. I can only imagine how that team was feeling when Brunson wasn't able to, when really it's probably when Trae Young made both of those free throws, or even when Trae Young was going to the line and they knew what was in store and that they were going to have to go an extra 5 minutes on this thing. I imagine how you felt as a fan. I know how I felt. Now imagine how they felt on those tired legs after giving. I mean, say what you want about their defense, and it was not good down the stretch of the game. Second half, the whole thing, they gave it everything they had. Everything they had. Hawks got a bunch of offensive rebounds. Knicks were a little careless with the ball, 18 turnovers, all the things. It wasn't for lack of effort, and it wasn't for lack of caring. And for them to find it in themselves after just emptying the gas tank and come out with that win, man, coming up with some big defensive plays in the overtime period. Cannot say enough about this team. Cannot say enough about these guys. Cannot say enough about the culture that they've built. And it is why, for as imperfect as they may be, you will not convince me that this team can't contend for a title in a few months.